December 3rd, 1988, on a frozen railway line near the East German and Polish border. Two trains were moving toward each other on the same track. Inside one signal box, a dispatcher suddenly grabbed the telephone in panic. A freight train had passed a red signal. Moments later, both dispatchers realized something horrifying. The collision was now unavoidable. One of the trains could still be warned by radio. The other could not. And within minutes, 8 people would be dead. This is the story of the 1988 Horka Train Collision, a forgotten Cold War railway disaster where everyone knew what was about to happen, but nobody could stop it. Horka is a small municipality in the far eastern part of Germany, with a population of 173 people as of December 2020. The town is located just 7 kilometres or 4 miles west of the Polish border, and around 64 kilometres or 40 miles southeast of the city of Cottbus. Running through Horka from east to west was the Węgliniec-Roßlau Railway, an important main line that first opened in 1875. Originally, the railway had 2 tracks and was fully electrified. However, after the Second World War, part of the line became part of Polish territory. In 1946, passenger services on the route were cancelled, and the railway was reduced to a single track. Because the route through the forest was single track, trains travelling in opposite directions could only pass each other at stations. These meetings usually took place either at Horka on the East German side or at Bielawa Dolna in Poland. The train involved in the disaster was DSTP 2241, a railway staff train travelling east toward Poland. The train consisted of a diesel locomotive and 3 passenger cars carrying 9 employees of the DR. The National Railway of East Germany, also known as the DDR, travelling in the opposite direction, was transit freight train TDG 4408, a long and heavy coal train operated by the Polish National Railway, known as PKP. Pulling the freight train was a series ST43 diesel locomotive. On the morning of December 3rd, 1988, at around 7:30 a.m., a Polish ST43 locomotive pulling a heavy coal train was approaching Bielawa Dolna station. From there, the train would cross the border into East Germany and continue toward Horka. At the same time, on the German side of the border, a V100 locomotive was waiting at Horka's freight yard, around 8.6 kilometres or 5 miles away. The locomotive was preparing to depart with DSTP 2241. The driver of the Polish freight train was alone inside his locomotive, while the German train was carrying a driver and 10 passengers. At 7:33 a.m., the German dispatcher, identified in sources only as Mr. G, contacted his Polish colleague using the railway telephone line used exclusively for train operations. During the call, the German dispatcher confirmed the schedule and informed his colleague that the German train would soon be departing toward Poland. The Polish dispatcher confirmed that the track was clear and safe for the train to proceed. He then gave permission for the signal to be turned green. Despite the snowy winter conditions, the lightweight German train posed no difficulty for the powerful V100 locomotive. At 7:36 a.m., DSTP 2241 departed Horka Freight Yard and began moving east toward the Polish border. As required by procedure, the German dispatcher informed his Polish colleague that the train was now on the line. The constant exchange of information between the 2 dispatchers was extremely important. At the time, German trains operating on this route did not have radio communication systems. The railway also lacked a modern block system that could automatically keep trains separated from each other. Because of this, safe operation depended entirely on the dispatchers coordinating train movements correctly. But on this morning, something went terribly wrong. 7 minutes after the German train departed Horka, the telephone inside the signal box suddenly rang. Mr. G answered the call and immediately heard panic on the other end of the line. The Polish dispatcher was speaking in a frantic mixture of German and Polish. The message was horrifying. The freight train had passed a red signal. At that moment, the collision became almost impossible to prevent. The Polish dispatcher told his German colleague to stop the train by radio, unaware that the German train had no radio system at all. It remains unknown whether the Polish dispatcher managed to contact the freight train. But by then, it likely made no difference. At 7:44 a.m., the two trains collided head-on. The impact completely destroyed the German V100 locomotive. Both train drivers were killed instantly, along with 6 passengers on board the German train. Diesel fuel spilled across the wreckage and quickly caught fire, eventually engulfing both locomotives and part of the German train in flames. Just seconds after the collision, 2 truck drivers crossed a bridge above the railway line only a few metres from the crash site. Realising that a major accident had occurred, they drove away to find a telephone and call for help. At the same time, dispatchers on both sides of the border also began reporting the disaster. Several fire departments rushed into the forest toward the crash site, joined by forest workers and emergency railway crews from both Germany and Poland. Rescue workers began cutting through the mangled passenger cars in search of survivors. 4 people were eventually pulled from the wreckage alive, including 2 Germans and 2 Polish citizens. Recovery operations proved extremely difficult. A railway crane brought in by the DR was unable to separate the destroyed wreckage. Later that day, a nearby military officers' school sent an armoured recovery vehicle equipped with heavy recovery equipment. With its help, crews were finally able to pull apart the twisted remains of the trains. At the time, the accident received very little attention in the media. Within a week, the railway line had returned to normal operation while investigators searched for the cause of the disaster. Investigators quickly determined that the Polish freight train had caused the disaster by passing a red signal. However, with the freight train driver killed in the collision and no data recording systems available at the time, investigators were never able to determine exactly why the signal was ignored. The investigation officially ended in 1990 without a definitive explanation. During the investigation, crews discovered damage to the freight train's pneumatic braking system, but according to official calculations, the train should still have had enough braking power to stop at the signal, or at least only pass it slightly while remaining safe. In the end, the final report listed 2 causes for the accident. The primary cause was the freight train passing a red signal. The secondary cause was the lack of a radio communication system that could have been used to warn the train drivers about the danger ahead. Unofficially, rumours later circulated that East Germany, or the DDR, was already facing serious financial problems in 1988. According to these claims, money that could have been used to install radio systems in DR locomotives had been spent elsewhere instead. Only a few years later, radio systems became mandatory on trains in Germany. Modern safety systems, including the Indusi train protection system, were also installed across the German railway network. These systems can automatically stop a train if it passes a red signal. Because of these improvements, a repeat of the Horka disaster became far less likely. So what do you think? Could this disaster have been prevented if modern safety systems had existed earlier? Or was the collision already unavoidable the moment the freight train passed the red signal? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below.